The evening air felt heavy as I walked the familiar path to the stable, its chill biting through my jacket and tightening around my shoulders. My fingers gripped the edge of my coat pockets, knuckles white, as though the gesture alone could ground me. I didn't usually take such long walks to see Maximus at this hour, but tonight, after the brief call from Jake, the clipped tone, the all-too-casual, "I'll be late again," I'd barely been able to sit still. I'd tried to wait, told myself I could be patient, but the silence of the house felt too loud, too empty. Jake hadn't always been like this. I'd fallen for him years ago, back when he was attentive, playful, the type of man who made me feel seen. He'd find little ways to show his affection, like leaving notes in my lunch bag or calling just to tell me he missed me. Those gestures used to feel like a promise, a quiet assurance that he'd always choose me. Now it was as though he'd turned into a shadow of that man, distant and unreachable. And I was left grasping at fragments of memories, trying to remember what that love had felt like. The stable finally loomed ahead, a warm haven against the encroaching darkness. My pace quickened as I neared, eager for the comfort I knew I'd find inside. The familiar creak of the door greeted me as I pushed it open, and the smell of hay, leather, and Maximus's earthy scent enveloped me. It was a smell I'd come to associate with peace, with grounding, so unlike the tension I felt at home. As I stepped in, I spotted him immediately. Maximus was waiting near the edge of his stall, his dark eyes soft and wise in the dim light. He let out a quiet nicker as I approached, a gentle greeting that tugged at my heart. I walked over, reaching out instinctively to run my hand along his coat, letting the warmth of his body sink into me. I could feel my shoulders begin to relax, the storm inside me quieting. "Hey, Max," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. "Guess it's just you and me tonight. Again." He lowered his head, leaning into my touch, and for a moment, I felt something soften inside me, like he understood the weight I was carrying. I leaned my forehead against his neck, letting my fingers tangle in his mane, and closed my eyes, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "It's like he doesn't even see me anymore," I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I thought this was just a rough patch, something that would pass. But it's been months, Max. Months of late nights, missed dinners, excuses. I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar sting of tears. And I can't shake the feeling that he's somewhere else, with someone else. The thought of it, of Jake with another woman, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I'd tried so hard to dismiss the idea, told myself it was my own insecurities, that I was imagining things. But the silence between us had grown into something I couldn't ignore. And with each passing day, it felt like I was losing him a little more. Maximus shifted beside me, nudging my shoulder with his nose as though trying to draw me back from the edge of my despair. I let out a small, shaky laugh, wiping away a stray tear as I turned back to him. "You always know just what to say, don't you?" I murmured, rubbing his muzzle. It was absurd, maybe, talking to him like this, confiding my heartache to a horse. But there was a strange comfort in it, a feeling of being understood in a way I hadn't felt in so long. I ran my hands along his coat, the soft rhythm of brushing calming my frayed nerves. Maximus was the only constant I had right now, the one part of my life that felt steady and solid. With Jake slipping away, I clung to my time with Maximus like a lifeline, a thread of stability I couldn't afford to lose. "Maybe I'm just overthinking everything," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Maybe things will go back to the way they were. Maybe I just need to be patient." Maximus huffed as though he could sense my uncertainty, and I felt a small smile tug at my lips. I knew he couldn't truly understand the weight of my words, but his presence was enough. He listened quietly and without judgment, and somehow, that felt more reassuring than anything Jake had said to me in months. I stayed with him for what felt like hours, letting the steady rhythm of his breathing lull me into a rare sense of calm. By the time I finally left the stable, the night had deepened, stars blinking softly against the dark sky. I cast one last glance at Maximus, feeling a strange, bitter-sweet gratitude. He was my refuge, my safe place in the midst of the storm. And as I walked back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that, no matter what happened with Jake, Maximus would be there, waiting for me in the quiet. In the days that followed, Jake's absences became a constant in my life, each late night and vague excuse pulling us further apart. He'd come home well after dinner, his shirt rumpled, his eyes avoiding mine as he mumbled an apology and brushed past me. I would stay up, waiting in the silence of our dimly lit kitchen, hoping he'd give me something, anything, to hold on to. But each night he'd slip further into himself, retreating behind a wall I couldn't breach. The mornings weren't any better. He'd rush through breakfast, his focus glued to his phone, nodding absently at my attempts at conversation. He used to joke that I was his morning sunshine, that he couldn't start his day without hearing my voice. But now it was as if I didn't exist. I'd ask him about his work, try to pull him into even the smallest of talks, but his answers were clipped, as though my words were a burden he didn't have the patience to bear. One morning, after yet another sleepless night, I finally snapped. I stood in the kitchen watching as he poured his coffee, his gaze distant, and felt the words bubbling up inside me, hot and desperate. "Jake," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Do you even see me anymore?" He looked up, startled, his expression blank. "What?" I felt my throat tighten, but I pushed forward. "You're never here. And when you are, it's like I'm invisible. I don't know what's happening, but I feel like I'm losing you." His eyes flickered, just for a moment, and for a second, I thought I saw something. A glimmer of guilt, maybe, or regret. But then he shook his head, sighing heavily as he set down his mug. "Anna, it's just, work's been intense lately," he muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "I'm sorry, but I don't have time to talk about this right now." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, my heart aching with a mixture of anger and sorrow. His words echoed in my mind, a painful reminder of how little space I occupied in his life now. He didn't even seem to care that I was hurting, that I was reaching out, desperate to understand what had gone wrong. That evening, after he'd called to tell me he'd be late, again, I found myself walking to the stable. I didn't even bother to put on my coat. I just needed to get out, to escape the suffocating emptiness of our house. The familiar path to Maximus felt like a lifeline, a pull I couldn't resist. When I reached the stable, he was waiting, his head raised as he watched me approach. I let out a shaky breath, feeling the weight of the day settle on my shoulders as I walked over to him. He nickered softly, as though sensing my turmoil, and nudged my hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. I leaned against him, my fingers digging into his mane, and felt the tears start to fall. "I'm so tired, Maximus," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." Maximus pressed his head against my shoulder, his warmth grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in so long. I let my fingers trace patterns along his coat, the softness of his fur a balm against the ache in my chest. He didn't offer answers, didn't try to fix the pain, but somehow, his silent presence was enough. I stayed with him for hours, brushing his coat, feeding him treats, losing myself in the simple, rhythmic tasks that quieted my mind. In the stillness of the stable, I could let go of the hurt, the doubt, the gnawing suspicion that I was losing everything I'd once held dear. Maximus was my refuge, my one constant in a world that felt like it was slipping away. As I ran my fingers through his mane, I realized that I felt more seen, more valued in these quiet moments with him than I had in my own home in months. And with each passing day, I found myself returning to him, lingering in the stable long after the sun had set, finding comfort in the steadiness of his presence. I felt safe and secure. I hadn't felt like this in a long time. But even as I clung to Maximus, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was breaking inside me, something I couldn't ignore forever. I found myself moving her hands further down towards his shaft with each passing day. Is this the comfort I have been craving for so long? One cold evening, after hours of waiting alone at the dinner table, Jake finally came home, looking distant and distracted. He barely glanced at me as he headed to the bedroom, muttering something about a work meeting that had run late. I followed him, watching as he tossed his suit jacket on a chair and disappeared into the bathroom. His phone lay on the bedside table, the screen lighting up with a new message. My heart pounded as I saw the preview of a text from an unsaved number. Thanks for tonight. Let's do it again soon? The words blurred as a tidal wave of hurt and anger surged inside me. I felt my hands shake as I read them over and over, trying to make sense of it. I'd known something was wrong. I'd felt it in my bones, but seeing proof felt like a punch to the gut. My head spun as I tried to breathe, my mind racing with questions. Was it another woman? How long had this been going on? Did he even care anymore? Unable to bear the sight of his phone, I rushed out of the room, my mind a storm of hurt and betrayal. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and headed to the stable. Maximus was waiting for me, as he always was, his gentle eyes watching as I stumbled toward him, my vision blurred with tears. I buried my face in his mane, letting out a choked sob. I'm such a fool, Maximus. I thought he loved me. My voice trembled as I clung to him, my hands twisting in his mane. How could he do this? How could he just leave me like this? Maximus shifted slightly, his warm breath a soothing balm against my cheek. I stayed there for what felt like hours, pouring out every ounce of pain, frustration, and betrayal. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted but strangely calm, as though I'd purged some of the weight crushing my chest. Maximus had been my anchor, my steady companion through the night, and I realized that his quiet strength was something I couldn't live without. A few days later, I finally reached out to my best friend, Lisa. I hadn't seen her in weeks, too ashamed to admit how bad things had gotten with Jake. But now, with everything out in the open, I needed someone to lean on. When Lisa showed up that evening, she was armed with a bottle of wine, a tub of ice cream, and the kind of warm, understanding smile that only a true friend could give. We sat on the porch, the evening air cool around us, sipping wine as I filled her in on everything. I told her about the text, the distance, the empty bed. She listened quietly, her expression growing darker with each word. "Oh, Anna," she murmured, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You deserve so much more than this. I know you loved him, but this isn't love anymore, is it?" Her words cut through me, painful but true. I stared down at my wine glass, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. I don't know who he is anymore. He used to be my best friend, Lisa. Now, it's like he's a stranger. She nodded, her gaze softening. But you have Maximus, right? You've been spending a lot of time with him? I smiled faintly, thinking of the hours I'd spent in the stable, the quiet comfort I found in Maximus's presence. Yeah, he's the only thing keeping me sane right now. I know it sounds silly, but being with him feels real, like he understands me, even if he can't say it. Lisa's eyes sparkled, and she tilted her head thoughtfully. Then I think it's about time I met this knight in shining armor of yours. Let's go to the stable. As we walked across towards the stable, Lisa's sympathetic eyes met mine, and she asked me, "How do you deal with being alone so much?" I'd go crazy with frustration. A sly smile crossed my lips. Well, I found other ways to be satisfied. "Maximus!" Lisa leaned forward, intrigued. He's been very attentive. My cheeks flushed as I described our encounters on the way to the stable. I could tell Lisa was getting excited to meet him. The way he moves under me, his powerful body. Yes, Lisa, it's incredible. Better than Jake ever was. "Show me," she whispered. The night air was crisp as we stumbled down to the stables, giggles echoing in the darkness. Our yoga pants hugged every curve. The stable's warm wooden interior welcomed us, smelling of leather and hay. All I can reveal is that was a night that me and Lisa would never forget. The air in the house felt thick and stifling as I waited for Jake to come home that night, the silence weighing down on me like a shroud. I had spent the entire day preparing myself for this moment, replaying the words I wanted to say over and over in my head until they felt like armor. Tonight, I would finally confront him. I would let out everything I'd been holding inside, all the pain, the doubt, the desperate need for truth. As the minutes dragged on, my heartbeat quickened, pounding in my chest like a war drum. I glanced at the clock, 9:12 p.m. He'd promised he'd be home by 7. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, sharp and hot, mingling with the fear that maybe he'd never come back at all. But just as I was about to lose hope, I heard the familiar sound of his car pulling into the driveway. I stood in the doorway, watching as he stepped inside, shrugging off his coat and looking up to find me waiting. His face registered a brief flicker of surprise, his gaze darting from me to the empty dining table behind me. I had set it for dinner, hoping that tonight, just once, he'd keep his word. But now, the food sat cold and untouched. "Anna," he said, his voice hesitant as he avoided my gaze. "I'm sorry. I know I said I'd be home earlier, but—" "Don't," I cut him off, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound strong. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before looking him in the eye. "Jake, we need to talk. I can't keep doing this. Whatever this is, I need answers." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at the floor as he rubbed a hand over his face. "Look, Anna, I'm tired, and it's been a long day. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" "No," I said, my tone firmer than it had ever been. "We've been putting this off for too long. I'm standing here night after night waiting for you to come home, hoping you'll finally tell me what's going on, but you never do. You just disappear without a word, leaving me here to wonder if I even matter to you anymore." My words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, and I watched as his expression shifted, a glimmer of something, maybe guilt, flickering in his eyes before he turned away, pacing to the other side of the room. I clenched my fists, feeling the frustration, the sadness, the desperation swirling inside me like a storm. "Anna," he said finally, his voice strained. "It's not that simple. Work has been difficult lately. There's pressure, deadlines, things you wouldn't understand. I'm just trying to keep it all together." "Then why shut me out?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why do you leave me here night after night without a word? Why can't you even look at me when you walk through the door?" He stopped pacing, his back still turned to me, and let out a long sigh. "Because I don't have the energy, Anna. I don't have the energy to come home and deal with this." "Deal with what?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. "With me? With your wife who's been here, waiting for you, wondering if she's enough? Do you have any idea what that feels like, Jake? To be treated like an afterthought?" He turned to face me, his eyes hardening. "And do you have any idea what it's like to be constantly under pressure, feeling like you're never good enough, like you're failing every single day?" The words stung, but I forced myself to hold my ground. "Then let me in, Jake. Let me help you. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? Facing things together? But you haven't given me a chance. You've pushed me away, kept me in the dark." He shook his head, looking away again. "Maybe I just needed space, Anna. Maybe I needed time to figure things out on my own without feeling like I was letting you down." The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, and I felt the familiar ache in my chest tighten, sharper than ever. I searched his face, looking for a glimmer of the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who'd once promised he'd always be there. But he seemed like a stranger now, distant and closed off, as though he was hiding behind a wall I couldn't breach. I took a shaky breath, fighting back tears. "Do you even want this anymore, Jake? Do you even want us?" He didn't answer immediately, and the silence felt like a knife cutting through me. He glanced at me, his face softened, a flicker of regret in his eyes. But still, he couldn't bring himself to say the words I needed to hear. Instead, he let out a long sigh, running a hand through his hair as though trying to find the right words. "Anna, I don't know," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I want right now." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, everything I'd held onto crumbling around me. I had waited, hoped, fought for us, for him, only to be met with uncertainty, with a hollow, empty confession that left me reeling. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door, feeling the sting of his silence as I stepped outside. The night air was cold, biting against my skin, but I barely noticed. My mind was numb, my heart aching with the weight of everything I'd lost, everything that had once been my anchor. I found myself heading down the familiar path to the stable, my legs carrying me forward on instinct alone. When I reached the stable, Maximus was waiting, his dark eyes watching me with a gentle understanding that nearly brought me to my knees. I stumbled over to him, my hands reaching out to steady myself against his warmth, and the dam inside me broke. The tears spilled over, hot and silent, as I clung to him, feeling the weight of my shattered heart pour out in waves. "I don't know what to do, Maximus," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "I thought he loved me. I thought we'd built something real, something that could survive anything. But now, I don't know." Maximus nudged my shoulder softly, his warm breath a comfort against the cold night air. I let my fingers tangle in his mane, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breaths beneath my hand. In his presence, the pain eased, if only slightly, and I felt a flicker of solace, a reminder that, even in my darkest moments, I wasn't alone. As I sank down beside him, I realized how much I'd come to rely on Maximus, how deeply his quiet strength had anchored me in the midst of my storm. He was my constant, my refuge, the one place where I felt truly seen, truly valued. I could feel the warmth of his body, the gentle thud of his heartbeat, grounding me, soothing the raw edges of my hurt. I sat with him in the silence, letting the weight of the night settle around me. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could find peace even without Jake. That maybe the love I had for Maximus for myself was enough to see me through. I thought about my evening with Lisa. I took one look at Maximus, and that was it. Another evening session, and it was amazing. The night stretched on, and as dawn approached, I felt something shift inside me. It was subtle, barely a whisper, but it was there. A quiet resolve, a glimmer of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I realized then that no matter what happened with Jake, I would survive this. I would heal, rebuild, and move forward. And as I looked into Maximus's steady gaze, I knew that he would be there beside me, every step of the way. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting a soft, golden light across the kitchen as I poured myself a cup of coffee. Despite the quiet stillness in the house, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of peace. The confrontation with Jake had been brutal, leaving us on shaky, uncertain ground, but something in me had shifted. I wasn't clinging to the same desperate hope, nor did I feel like I was waiting around for answers he might never be able to give. Instead, I felt the stirrings of self-assurance, a quiet strength that came from deep within. The buzzing of my phone pulled me from my thoughts. I glanced down and saw a message from Lisa. "I'm coming over. Be there in 10. A smile crept onto my face as I sipped my coffee. Lisa had been my rock through all of this, her steady support reminding me that even in the darkest of times, I wasn't alone. I had confided everything in her during our last girls' night, Jake's distance, the late nights, the confrontation. She'd listened, her understanding gaze holding me together as I unraveled. And she'd been fascinated by Maximus, the way he had become my quiet source of strength. She'd wanted to meet him, and now, it seemed, was the perfect time. The front door opened a few minutes later, and Lisa walked in, her eyes bright, her arms laden with a bag of pastries and a bottle of orange juice. "Mimosas for strength," she declared, setting everything down on the table with a grin. She pulled me into a hug, holding me tight. "Anna," she murmured, her voice soft. "You look different. Lighter, maybe?" I nodded, a faint smile tugging at my lips. I I think I finally feel like I can breathe again. Jake and I have a lot to figure out, but I'm not waiting around for him anymore. I think for once I'm okay with not knowing. Whatever happens, I know I'll be okay. She squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening with pride. I'm so glad to hear that. You've been through so much, Anna, and I'm so proud of you. We sipped our mimosas and shared a few bites of pastry. I laughed, feeling a surge of excitement at the thought of us going back over to Maximus. He had been my constant through everything, his quiet companionship bringing me comfort and stability when I'd needed it most. Sharing him with Lisa felt like a way of solidifying the progress I'd made, a way of saying goodbye to the old, uncertain version of myself. After our first encounter together with Maximus, I knew she wanted more. I hesitated no more. Shall we make our way over for round 2, I asked. I thought you'd never ask, she replied. We began to head over to the stables, giggling. Maximus was waiting for us.